Let's talk about money. That's it. Cool. Excellent. All right. Thank you, crew. Look, this is the last one for the week. So I just want to kind of, by show of hands, you hanging in there? Is everyone doing okay? Yeah? Cool. Excellent. I know it's been a huge amount of content, and this is more of that content at the end, but I'm going to try and get through it fairly quickly, go across what I think are some real key things for you to take home, and then let's exit gracefully. I know you've got your cultural walk tomorrow morning, but exit gracefully into Friday afternoon with your head full of knowledge, and then re-energize for next week with the projects. I want to also make sure that there's room in this last discussion for interaction. So please, if you have questions, I think I'll go through a bunch of stuff. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, and then we'll open up for discussion. And I really want that discussion because it helps all of us get through and understand and strategize about how we can grow the pot for the thing that we love, which is why we're all here, which is computational social science. So yeah, you've met me before. I don't need to introduce who I am. I will, of course, acknowledge that we're continuing on this beautiful unceded land, the land of the Kulin Nation. Thanks, China. Let's talk about grant writing. This is an essential skill, and hopefully by the end of this hour, you also will learn to love it in the same way that I love it. Because grant writing, I think it gets a bad rap. We think sometimes about grant writing as this necessary, like kind of evil thing we have to do that takes us away from doing the real research that happens in the papers, the books, the other outputs, and that, we have to waste our time trying to, apply for or get funding, and that takes us away from the real research. In this next hour, I'm going to completely alter your thinking on that, I hope, in terms of the position of grant writing as an essential skill and something that I see as now fun and actually complementary and necessary in the practice of doing research. All right. So grant writing, let's be clear straight up, it is a form of persuasive writing. And there are many ways in which we engage in forms of persuasive writing in parts of our academic, and indeed, if for some of you end up in industry and you had your industry panel today, similar forms of writing that happen there. And so grants sit up there, I think, with project proposals. So for most of you, I know in the room, there's a lot of still PhD students. You'll have done a confirmation or a stage 2 or some form of a project proposal. That is the closest thing, I think, to what many of you, if you've never had a go at writing a grant is very similar to that, because what you're doing is it's the thing that happens before the actual research, right? It's putting out the idea, what you want to do, a hypothesis, a question, something like that, and then part of that process is making it persuasive to convince someone. Now, in the case of obviously your confirmation document in your PhD, it's persuading a panel that you know what you're talking about and there's a really good project there and please just leave me alone so I've got the next 2 years to do this in peace. For a grant, it's quite similar. It's saying, look, there's a necessary question here. I'm the right person to study it. Give me money so I can go and do that. And so think about those as part and parcel of a craft that you will continue to hone throughout the rest of your careers. These are necessary forms of writing that sit and complement the other forms of writing that you will do. And let's be really clear about something. When we're talking about grants, these are different to fellowships, and we're going to talk about both today. So I want to make an early distinction here that fellowships and grants are different kinds of things. Yes, a fellowship is a form of grant, but these are two very different things. And it's particularly important for all of you in the room because most of you are early career researchers. And so it means that for many of you, the fellowship is going to be the thing that you might be looking towards, because fellowships are the kinds of grant funding that obviously invest in you as an individual, right? And there is in the grant funding scheme that we have here in Australia and indeed in other parts of the world, you, particularly in your early career, are going to be restricted in the kinds of grant funding that you can apply for. And so there are many grants, of course, which you kind of have to have security, continuing appointment, something like that in order to be eligible to write for and apply for that form of funding. And so that means that many of the funding sources you may find yourself applying for directly will be fellowships, where you're writing in your salary against a broader project, or indeed it's a completely kind of solo fellowship like a DECRA or something like that in the ARC context. And the distinction I see is really clear here. A fellowship is about you, right? It's an investment in you at a particular career stage. So the DECRAs are obviously the ones that the ARC set out as the investment in the early career. The future fellowships at the time were about the mid-careers, and the laureates were about the kind of, latter stage career. But they're all clearly investments in the individual, right? Their capacity, their standing, letting them go and do a bunch of research, and it's very much focused on them and building them up as a leading researcher within a particular field. Whereas grants are much more interested in the research, and it's much more focused then on the field, the topic, the questions and such. The team is important, but that's not the outcome of it. Right. And that's it's something I want that penny to drop here today, is the difference between, because once you understand the distinction between the two, it makes it a lot easier to apply across those boundaries. So fellowships, what do? They're about buying time, right? They're about giving you as a researcher a salary support, something that invests, as I said, in you to be able to go and do and give you the independence to go and do a bunch of research which you feel is important, but ultimately also puts a roof over your head and keeps you in the employ of a university for a few more years, right? They can be obviously useful then in also building your CV to show, hey, look, I have a track record. I can attract funding. Therefore, I'm someone that you might want to give a permanent job to, because I'm seen as someone who is recognized through obviously a very fickle process, but it's the one we have, as someone who can attract that kind of funding. And so that's very much about that independence and establishment of research trajectory. I will make it clear today that is not the only path to success, right? I have never got a fellowship in my entire career, and there are many others in the field that have never received a fellowship and have had otherwise very, very enjoyable and successful careers to date. And so fellowships, please do not think this is the only path that one can take, but it is a path. So yes, when you get them, they can obviously be seen as a golden ticket. Buyer beware, it doesn't always work like that. And so sometimes they can also be a bit of a poison chalice, where they, through other means, if you're thinking about a continuing academic career, fellowships take you out perhaps of teaching and other kinds of activities. And so one has to be careful, right, about the balance here, right? I'm not going to say don't go for a fellowship. It's not a really good thing. But as I said, be measured, right, about why you're doing it and for what reasons and that. And don't be under an illusion that once one, say, gets a DECRA or that everything is just kind of open up in front and easy sailing from there. Not always. As I said with grants, though, grants are very much framed around the idea of building capacity and capability. So what they're doing is saying, all right, there's an area of research for which research is happening at the moment. So in the areas we're doing right now, it's around really important questions about algorithms and society or whatever it might be. Now, that research is already happening in those areas. But if we were to put some money into that, then more research could happen, or research could happen faster, or we could ask something bigger of that area. And so let's be really clear that without funding, research is still happening, particularly by continuing academics and particularly in the humanities and social science. When you're writing grant applications, the argument then becomes about what more could be done with that monetary investment. Right. And so that that thinking around that of not that the research doesn't happen without it, but that the research is bolder, bigger, right? Faster, right? Higher quality, whatever it is with that. And so it's about those questions of scale, right? What you can do. It's about building then consortia, right? So particularly in, say, we think about industry-funded research or co-sponsored research, it's then also about enabling partnerships in ways that couldn't be done without that kind of formal investment or partnership model. And so that's the difference here. And so in thinking about when you yourself are getting involved in these projects or the beneficiary of research funding from someone else's project, it helps to know which of those models you're working in and how that really does differ. All right. So just on the back of that definition, a pause for a tip here. You're all incredibly intelligent and motivated individuals. And I got a piece of advice early in my career that I will impart now onto you, which is that I'm sure for all of you, and I know you've got the projects next week as well, you will all have a ledger of ideas for topics, for questions, for things that you could probably, with a bit of funding, get off the ground pretty quickly, right? For things that are interesting to you, that you would love to poke around in a little bit, that you'd love to kind of have a go at developing, asking, doing in some way, right? And so that kind of that notepad, that ledger of ideas you have, whether it's formally written down somewhere or just in the back of your head, one of my former mentors said, Dan, you need to at any time be ready to pitch for $10,000 in an hour, $100,000 in a day, or $1 million in a week. And the idea here is that if I turned around and said, hey, and I'm the leader of the lab, and I said, I just got a call from someone, they've got some money in their budget, it's June 26th, it's the end of the financial year, and we need to spend this money, right, in the next hour, right? Could you spend it? What would you spend it on? What could we do with that, right? And that's the idea, is that more often than not, money comes either we're in poverty or sometimes we're in oversupply. And I've seen it happen where an opportunity genuinely like that has landed, where it's like, this funding scheme is undersubscribed. We need to get something off the ground today to put in there because I just heard that if we put something in, we're a really, really good shot of getting it off the ground. Right. And so part of this is in the ones, particularly the second and the third there, is it's about having the idea of you've got a relationship, you've got friends or colleagues that you've met at a conference or you've met here and you remember talking to them about an idea, right? And so if an opportunity presented itself where it's like, hey, we've got a really good chance. If we bid for this or we do this, we could actually get it, right? To be able to slot in, get those people at the other end of a phone or an email interested, building into that, and get it up and build it up. The point is that to always be thinking about what are the kinds of research opportunities, questions that one could actually write out, get ready, and get out there and get up to a bid stage, and that you don't necessarily need to overthink this, right? Grants don't have to be all-consuming for 6 months of a year, writing, refining again and again and again and again. Do the thing, write it, submit, move on, right? Whether you get it or not, it's just about that cycle, and it's about getting as many of those opportunities out as possible that hopefully one will actually turn around and become funded. All right. It stopped advancing. Oh, do I have to reshare? Oh, okay. It's just catching up. All right. Whoa, okay. Here we go. All right. It's going to come back. All right. Now, this is me bearing all. This is the last 10 years of my ARC funding applications. I've included 2 that I've got in under submission right now. We've in the middle of rejoinders for a discovery project and a LEAF grant. This is an infrastructure grant. So these are all ARC projects. These are mostly discovery projects. You can tell that by the DP on the side there. and there's a couple of linkage projects in there as well, and there's a future fellowship, right? And so I've ordered this temporarily. So this goes back to 2016. And there's a project here. You can probably see it as the same project. So we've got image machines at the top, and then you've got the same grant because it didn't get funded, the same grant again in that DP 18. And then I want you to skip over the LP one. So on the fourth line, you've got DP 19, automating culture, investigating social media's machine vision algorithms, same grant again. And then we flip forward to that first green line there, where we've got using machine vision to explore Instagram's everyday promotional cultures funded. Fourth try, right? Fourth try. So that was a grant with Nick Carra, and in that particular turn with the DP 2000, like the DP 20, that was with Gene Burgess as well. We got the money, right? But 4 attempts at getting it, right? So sometimes you just need to be persistent and not take no for an answer, and have an idea that you absolutely believe in. That grant, I can recognize, was ahead of its time. In the funding rounds previous, perhaps not DP 19, that was just unlucky, but in 17 and 18, they told us, A, it couldn't be done, right? B, why would you bother about studying this? You know, those kinds of things. We persisted, and by the time we got to the kind of 19 and 20 rounds, the field was catching up, right? The reason why one would want to study Instagram and machine vision algorithms of social media was pretty apparent at that point. But we're a bit ahead of our time, I think, in the earlier rounds. We got good feedback. We used that feedback. But the key thing is, behind this, I haven't shown on the outside of that, is Nick and I and others, we're still publishing work around it. We were still getting on with the research where we could. We were scrapping together. Not shown there is like a $20,000 grant that we wrote and got at the University of Queensland, where we both were at the time, to fund some of that work as well, to bring a software developer on to help build a data scraper that we could use, right? To build a prototype, to do that stuff in the background. So the idea goes all the way back to 2016, but the funding didn't come until 2020, right? And so that's the idea, is like a good idea sometimes you just got to wait long enough, and eventually it's going to turn a corner. Same with that linkage project. We had one go, didn't quite get it across, put it back in, same team. We updated, we did a little bit more grantsmanship, and bang, we got it on the second try, right? That's another good one. Yeah, Jonas.
Thank you for sharing. This is actually really, really cool to see. When do you know to give up on something?
Yeah. When do you give up? I never give up. No, there are ones we gave up on. So actually, one here is the social science sustainability lab. We had a go at that one, and the one before it, the social discovery lab, that one's not going any further. That's like, we've had 2 cracks at that, and the reason for that is we've decided in its configuration, it's basically unfundable, right? Having had a couple of goes at it, but the ideas have been carved off in other directions, right? So we took the ideas and we broke it apart into other things. And so actually some of that is in one of those projects I've not listed there. So yeah, so not completely dead, but reconfigured, right? But yeah, I think it's in my nature. I don't give up and take no. And so that's part of the idea, is that you can always recycle the ideas, reuse them, repackage them, and think about another way forward on that. Yeah, it's a great question though. But yeah, so look, that future fellowship, that's another one I gave up on. So that future, I mean, I had 2 chances to go for it given the window. I had a crack at it then. That was 2020. Had a go. Now, you look at that title, Designing Speech Technologies for Authentic Human Interaction. Interestingly enough, there's an ADMS project, Generative Authenticity, and I've been having some really good productive conversations with Gene Burgess about this. And some of the ideas that are there, we're finding other avenues to kind of work on that. Now I actually don't need the future funding to pursue a lot of that. It would have been great. There would have been some really, really cool research coming of it. But again, that was probably 6 years ahead of its time. If that one had been funded, this current moment on large language technologies and stuff like that, we would have had a bunch of really cool knowledge to be able to inform us on that. Oh, well, we don't. But, that's it. It's like the ideas are still there. I'm still getting a chance to write about them. The research ideas aren't gone. It's just, there was an opportunity there. But look, I got other things to work on. We got, these other 3 projects aside from the Future Fellowship that have kept me mighty busy, just, regardless. So that's fine. But normalizing rejection, it is part of the process here. All right. So now this is the key. If you take away one thing from this session and it's late on a Friday, this is the one. And feel free to take a photo. I think you're going to get the slides and the recording anyway. All right, this is my model for thinking about funding. So there's 3 bubbles here, right? There's the research that you have a track record in. So this is about you and your capabilities. There's the research, the bubble at the top, which is research that can be funded by the ARC or another agency. So this is basically stuff that a funding body is willing to fund or capable of funding. And then there's the third bubble, which is the research you actually want to do. And let me be clear about, at the intersection of all 3 of those, that is a sweet spot that I urge everyone to try and find. That is you happiest, because that is you doing research you want to do, that you're recognized for as an expert, and that actually is getting funded. Now let's talk about the other zones around that though. So if we go to the top and we think about popping you in that top bubble but not intersecting the bottom 2, then yes, you're writing about and putting a grant in that is technically something that ARC or another agency wants to fund. But will they fund it? No, because you are not the person that is equipped to do that. So that's when you're looking at something going, someone really ought to research or do something about this, and write the grant in a way that says, hey, someone else should be doing this. I'm going to insert myself in that position, but you're not the person that's equipped to do that, right? And so it's a really hard sell to be like, well, this is a really good project, but the assessor's feedback is always going to say, but you're not the right person to do it, right? And so that's where that bridge is too hard to cross. What you need to do, if you really, really want to do that thing at the top, is build the CV and the track record to actually bring that down to the intersection of those 2 points. So it becomes both a really good fundable idea and one that someone's going to have the confidence in you being the right person positioned well to write about. And so this is the first take home from this graph, is the opportunity cost of writing the research grant. If in looking at the idea on paper, you think it already sits in the intersection of those 2 points, great, go for it. But if you've got the great idea, but you think it genuinely still sits just in that top bubble and you're not intersecting it, write the paper. Take that idea and publish it as a paper. Spend the time writing the paper or doing some other work to start to build the confidence, and put that idea off for a couple of years. It'll still be there, right? Just because someone else might have a similar idea and get it funded doesn't mean you're automatically excluded from also getting funded for it. Or work with them, right, on it. But that idea of don't rush early into a space before you've developed enough of that credibility that you're the one to be able to actually do it, right? And at the same time, don't hold off in going in for something that you are genuinely, able and you've got enough track record to do it. The other, at the back. Yeah, go for it.
So Daniel, how many times you've had to pivot your research because the idea you were working on became outdated and nobody was there to fund it? So how was that process of pivoting for you?
Yeah, so in terms of something I'm working on and the field's moved past it before the point. So those 2, that social lab that I'm talking about, that's what happened there a little bit, right? So things and technology advanced to a point where we couldn't actually do what we were talking about by the time that cycle had kind of gone around. So that means you have to kind of reinvent at that point. But it's also about thinking about your papers and your track record in just thinking carefully even about the titles of your papers. And when you're writing them, be specific enough, obviously, that someone can find your research and understand what the paper's about. But think of it through the lens of a reviewer reading through the list of your titles. Do those titles reflect the research truly and on what you're doing in there? Or are they written in a way that's really impenetrable and is going to be really hard to narrate like who it is you are and what you do, right? And so, if you've got a research idea that you're going to kind of plan for in a few years to have a go at, think about the titles of the papers. They're going to help you build towards that so you're legible in that position. Because regardless of the venues it's being published in or things like that, the titles do matter in that point too. But yeah, on the thing of time, yes, at some point ideas do date and you need to move on and move past and go somewhere else. Though the other lesson from this graph, the research you want to do, an unfortunate reality is that early in your career, you may not find yourself positioned in that middle kind of zone there a lot, right? Where you've got funded research, where you have track record and that you're having fun, and you may need to just shovel it a little bit to get and build that circle out a little bit so you can actually intersect those circles. So it might be that early on, these are not intersecting circles, but actually you're going to find yourself, sorry, that's not really working. But you might find yourself just in that left-hand intersection point, having to do something. It's not the greatest, the work that really, really fires you up, but it's necessary to build the track record to be able to then shift into that sweet spot in the middle where you're getting fundable work that you really want to do, that you're the best person placed to do it. And then, of course, there's the stuff that, you really want to do. You've got the track record in, but it's completely unfundable. And I've got a whole ledger of that stuff there. Now, look, I have it there. And in case, I don't know, that circle, someone appears, there's a little blip in there that says, Dan, we want to fund your really, really kooky thing, right? That you really love and you really want to do that. It's like, great, let's go, right? But I'm a realist, right? And there's a zone of stuff that I will actually be able to be funded for. All right. Which brings me to Miyagi. So hopefully this plays.
And your son must talk. Walk on the road. Walk right side, safe. Walk left side, safe. Walk middle. Sooner or later, get the squish, just like grip. Here, karate, same thing. Either you karate do yes, or karate do no. You karate do guess so. Just like grip.
All right. So Miyagi is commenting there, and it is one of my favorite movies, right? I am a Daniel, of course, so Daniel's son there. I did karate as well, so it is like that. And I'm a kid of the 80s, so this is me in my happy place. But Miyagi's talking about Daniel being indecisive at that point and kind of wanting to, he's kind of doing karate, but not kind of doing karate. He's not committing fully. And the idea of Miyagi is saying, no, if you're going to do something, do it all the way, or be clear and say no and don't do it. If you walk in the middle of the road, you're going to get the squish like the grape, right? It's like you're going to find yourself. Now, where I find this advice translates well is in computational social science. We need to be really, really clear about who we are and what the project is and what it isn't. Because far too often our grant funding falls through the cracks because it's trying to be too many things. Right? And so be very, very clear, right? When you're writing a project, are you advancing theory? Are you building a funky method? Are you doing both, right? And which is a clearer contribution, right? Because not every project is always doing all things. And it is okay for a grant to just be about advancing theory. And it is okay just to write something that is really, really cool and it's going to build a funky new method. But if you try and mix these up and you're not clear about what it is, or your partners and fellows who are part of the grant process aren't clear, then you're going to get the squish just like the grape. And the same is said about you and who you are. Are you going to market yourself in the grant as a computer scientist, as a sociologist, as a historian, as an anthropologist, be really, really clear. Too many of my own fellowships, particularly I had cracks at things, they weren't called a DECA in the day, it's called an APD. And every time I coded it, I'd code half computer science, half communication media studies. And what did my grants do? They went to one computer scientist, one communications media studies academic, and one said, yeah, that looks really interesting. And I really kind of gel with the computer science bits. I can't understand the communication bit though. Right. And the communication says, yeah, look, the comm stuff is really interesting, great, but I've got no idea about the technology. Right. What I should have done was confidently land and say, I'm a really, really good computer scientist, and this computer science project applies really well and authentically into this domain of communication. Right? And look at the credibility I have in that field, and they think it's amazing. But I am a computer scientist, that is who I am, right? And judge me as that. Or gone the other way, right? And being confident in assessing, I'm in communication, but I bring all this cool stuff from computer science as well. Yeah.
I'm just thinking about what you said on Monday. Does this hold less true as CSS becomes more of a valid field?
Yes. So it's changing, but I'm not sure and convinced it's there quite yet, right? And so, yes, eventually we're going to have a field where you're going to be able to say, I am a computational social science, and it's going to have a certain kind of credibility and credential attached to it. And you're hopefully going to have enough of us out there assessing that as well, and hopefully your grant gets read by me and I go, yes, fantastic, it's one of the chosen few, right? But I don't think we're there yet, right? And so I think at this point we still have to exercise care and caution in how we code. There are similar disciplines, so HCI, interaction design, very similar, and so in those where they coded there, most will get it when it lands right in the middle, but occasionally I've heard those that they find their way across in weird other locations where they're going to get the wrong kind of assessor and reviewer. But I think the point is you need to have a clear intellectual home for your work. And yes, our job is building that field. So we've got that home. But at the moment, I'm just, as much as we're doing the work now, it's going to be a few more years until we can really properly code that. And that's recognized as something. All right. The other thing here is that be really clear about it. Is this pre or post paradigmatic? So the idea of the paradigm is that when we're talking about post paradigmatic, it's established theory, established methods, and we're applying them and innovating them in a particular way, right? So we're going to take a survey design and we're going to update it with some cool computational additions. Isn't that great, right? Pre paradigmatic is data download packages to track, audience studies, stuff like that, where if I gave that to someone in media studies right now, they would not have the first idea how to come at that because it is completely new, right? There is we're talking about a handful of papers that have used data donation to look at, screen studies, audience habits, whatever it is. And so that's still pre-paradigmatic. And so, be really clear about what it is when you're writing your grant. Are you talking to someone who absolutely understands this? It's a tried and true method and you're just advancing it in a small way, or are you talking about something which has never been done, right? And writing that grant is very, very different in those spaces. All right. And we're almost at the end, and then it's questions. Different career stages mean for differing advice. So early in your career, it's more like the kind of Pokemon, got to catch them all. So you've got to be kind of on your toes a little bit more to collect opportunities, right? To be there, finger on the pulse, to jump onto other people's projects, to be there to kind of catch the exhaust out the back of a really successful lab, and just kind of glom onto those and build that network. Say yes a lot, right? Take those opportunities, build the CV. This is also a point at which I say strategic breadth. I'm not saying just skim across the top 1,000 miles wide and 1 inch deep, but the idea of be more open that not everyone is going to just employ you or have you on the grant for your very, very specific pet theory method or combination of both. You're going to have to be adaptable, right? So in my case, I'd done most of my PhD work was in esoteric, biologically inspired optimization paradigms, right? Genetic algorithms, ant colony optimization, really weird particle swarm stuff, all that, right? Now, was I going to find a postdoc or a grant in that area? Hell no, right? So what did I do? I switched over into information visualization and natural language processing because there were grants in that space and there was interest in that space, and I could see that there was a future in that space. I could see no future in evolutionary computation at the time, right? And so that idea of like a strategic move to start to broaden the CV out to make it appeal to a broader audience meant that I had more opportunities for funding, and I could actually bend my other researchers saying, hey, look, I've got credibility in computer science. I can do these other things as well. I can build algorithms. I can do this. I understand this. This is my language, right? These are good journals. I can publish my work in high-ranking journals. But it meant that was strategic breadth, right, to kind of broaden the appeal. If I just stuck narrowly into evolutionary computation, I'm sure I would have had fun, but I wouldn't have got funded. Latter career, you can do things a lot more strategically in terms of what you curate. You can say no to things. You start to build your own program. That's where your vision starts to come to the fore a bit more, because it's you making the decisions of the things you want to pursue. You're building the alliances and the teams. But just be real about that, right, at certain points. And that's not going to be obvious necessarily where that cutover is. But it's like, don't be too precious, I guess is my point early about the things that you join on to. Go and I would say find supportive teams. The most important thing early career is to find mentors and sponsors that are going to help you actually find your way into latter career. Right? So say yes, build deep, work with good people, right? Do that kind of work early, and then through the end of that, then begin to kind of pitch and build your own ideas and build your own trajectory as well. All right. We're at the question stage. Let's fire in. We've got 20 minutes, I think.
Thanks, Dan. Always great to listen to you. And I saw your last slide, and I think you said earlier on in your career, you should say yes. So wanted a bit of nuance on what sort of things you should say yes to, because one advice that I've gotten is that you also have to think about your story, and you don't want to say yes to projects that might not align with your story. So how broad we can go in terms of saying yes without compromising on our deep expertise?
Yeah, precisely. So look, I mean, some of this, of course, N of one, right? This is my story, but I think there is something here that's still true today. I was, as I said, working in natural language processing, information visualization. I saw a lot of big questions and opportunities in communication and media studies at the time. There were not a lot of people working in that space doing computational work. There were still a lot of people. When I looked into it, I read the papers and I went to colleagues' talks. I saw a lot of people using really manual methods, not in a way that's like, this is really good quality, qualitative, like it's important to have the human in the loop. I'm talking about mundane spade work, of which I looked at and thought, I reckon some of my kit bag could be really useful there. And so I started building an alliance because I thought, actually, I see more opportunity in that space, that nexus between where I was and communication and journalism, than what I saw opportunities in my own singular discipline if I'd stayed there and continued to pursue opportunities there. So I made a strategic decision to start saying yes to those kinds of projects because I was building a bridge into a space that I saw opportunity that would hopefully pay off. And it has for me, thankfully. So I think that's the thing, is like when you're looking at the opportunities that are put in front of you, think about not just, is this something that's kind of useful right now, but if I go through with this, where will I find myself? Will I be so far from my home discipline that I'll be unintelligible to anyone and I'll just be used up and chewed out? Like, do they just need the stats person on the project to go and heap a bunch of monkey work onto that you are just going to be there bored out of your skull doing it, and they're going to take all the credit and then you're just going to be cast adrift at the end? Or is it that you think there's a genuine understanding there that they really want something or want to do something differently or see an opportunity or really want to build this genuinely, which I say, yes, right, let's go for it. And so I think that's like, you got to develop that sense of like your judgment as to the kinds of team it is, like how genuine they are for you having a continuing role to play. You know, is this a kind of group that have a track record that this is just one project, but there'll be others down the line? Like, is this a continuing collaboration? Those are the kinds of things I always looked for in the early days before signing on to something. And then there's just the quick wins as well. Like, is this just a flash in the pan thing, but it's going to be useful just the same, right? That we can get some quick funding. It's going to be a bunch of work. I'm going to have to give up my, a couple of weeks of what I thought was going to be a holiday and just go and do it. But actually that's going to be really useful because that's something that's quick and I can put it on a line on the CV that I know is going to help me with the thing I really, really want to do later on. So yeah, it's hard, but just develop your own sense of judgment. But as I say, strategic no's, that the way to do a strategic no is like, hey, look, I would ordinarily love to do this, but I'm just too stretched right now. Right. So it's not torching the bridge. It's just saying, look, not at this time. Or actually, I can see why you've come to me, but here's a colleague that I think might be better placed for this opportunity. Right. Because that keeps you still seen as someone who's a connector or valuable to them. Right. So, yeah. So knowing when to say yes and no. But yeah, you're not going to get it right every time, though.
Hello. I have two questions.
Yeah, go.
The first one, can you connect with another researcher to do a grant application? Say you've got kind of like an interdisciplinary project and you're a specialist in one area with some cover and the other person is the same. Does that end up leading to like a more justifiable project as seen by people externally? And two, is there any benefit to doing projects essentially in your spare time that then can be built into something later because you can demonstrate that you've kind of like built something small and it's worked? Does that lead to kind of like better responses long term? Yeah.
Yes, and both. So the key is, right, the key here is complementary capabilities, right? What you want to avoid is duplication and of expertise in projects. So if you're a lead investigator or someone on a project, it's always absolutely imperative to show what you bring, what is your unique capabilities and how that complements the other. Now, in the case of the CSS work we do, this is the real key actually, is that in building a team, if you've got say, I don't know, let's think of something that it's about politics, right, and social media. And you've got a political scientist and you've got you who dabble across and you've done a little bit of work in political science, but your real heart is in the computational methods development, topic models, visualization, whatever it is. The key here is to lean onto that and be like, look, I am the gun person in this, but look at this other work I've done. I've got a leg in, I've got a touch point, right? So I'm not the expert. The expert's that person there, right? But we can communicate because I also understand their language, right? So it's about showing that you're not two islands that are completely separated, that there is a trading zone in the middle between. And for me, that's what Nick, Kara, and I did early. Nick is an expert and has legibility in cultural studies, in advertising, in that kind of work, promotional cultures. I had legibility in algorithms, in computational methods design. And so when we write the grants, we make that really clear. But what we also do is show in the middle the trading zone of publications that we've done where we're working together on a shared language and vocabulary that shows that we can actually bring these ideas together. So it's clear to anyone assessing it of like, great, tick the box. You've got someone who sits clearly in this domain, someone who sits clearly in this domain, and a clear indication that these two things are compatible and can actually be put together and make for legible research. And that's what makes good interdisciplinarity, right? Bad interdisciplinarity, or that won't get funded, is where it just looks like a grab bag of people that you put together from different silos, but you haven't done the work to articulate how are they going to actually work together or share a common language. And so to the second point, pilot work is crucial here, and I should have put a slide in on it, so thanks for asking the question, is that any of the grants I've shown you where they've had successful outcomes there's been pilot work that's underpinned that. Don't expect that someone's just going to fund you for $1 million or $500,000 in an ARC grant without some evidence that you've actually prototyped, piloted this in some way. And the best way to do that is internal funding schemes. So often you're going to find there's going to be small pots of money, and those small pots of money, they're going to feel like a pain in the ass to get the funding because the amount of time you're putting in versus the funding you get out of them is like often they don't weigh together, right? But what they do is they say someone somewhere has seen this idea and thought it's worthy of putting some money into. And so that kind of thing helps you establish a credibility that it is a fundable idea. Someone else has funded it. But also, you can get some money that can build you something that helps you actually provide an evidence or gets a paper up or something like that that shows and evidences this is not a harebrained idea. This is actually achievable. And if you give us the money, we can take this and take it to the next level. We can do more case studies. We can expand the pool, right? So so absolutely build the track record. And that's again to the final point on that, which is that you need to all think about grant writing also as not just like a month by month or year by year. This is multi-year processes we're talking about. It's not a bad idea to start thinking about this in terms of, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when are you going to be doing it? Because again, if you're going to write a fellowship, you need to have a plan for what is a track record you're going to be able to rest on in order to convince a funder that you are the best person in Australia to work on that particular topic. You can have the best idea in the world, but going back to that Venn diagram, if you are not seen as the best person to do it, they're not going to fund it. And ultimately, if I'm going to be completely, reflexive and honest, that was probably me when I went for my APD and what was like the Decker of the time. So because the idea, and it's not in the timeline there was another ARC grant I got, right, was a discovery project that was the same idea as my fellowship, right? So I went for the fellowship twice, got near missed on both, took it out, and then added 2 other CIs to it, and then we got that money on the third round, right? So I didn't get it as a fellowship, but the idea got funded. And what that told me was that they weren't convinced I was the right person to do it, but I added a speech pathologist and another computer scientist who had a complementary set of skills and was a much more senior figure. And then all of a sudden the idea had credibility because it had the right team around it. It was just, I wasn't convincing enough as an individual, right? And that's fine. Right. So that was my screw up, right? Is that I should have done more work early in that career to establish that credibility that I was the right person to do it.
Have you got any more questions?
How do we know how much everything costs?
Right. Well, everything costs money, right? And so salaries cost money. Get your hands and ask some of your supervisors, your senior mentors, other folks around in your spaces. Ask them for copies of their grants. There are some assessors when they read grants, the first thing they read is the budget. And ultimately, let's go back to it, right? I mean, I'm one of them because the first question I want is not about necessarily the research question or any of that. It's what are you spending the money on, right? Because that tells me something about what it is. Remember, a grant, I said this at the top, they're building capacity. I want to know what is that capacity? What is it on? Is that capacity? What do you need? You need more people? You need to train things? You need to code data? Like, what is it you need to do? Right? And that's how you need to start thinking about in grants. So early on, you're going to be thinking about salaries, because that's the thing that keeps you awake at night in early career when you don't have security, you don't have a continuing fellow, position. It's all about you as an individual and your salary. But eventually it becomes, well, actually, I need salary for someone else. So when I'm writing grants now, I'm thinking about those in my sphere who I need to fund to keep them there, to keep doing the awesome research. And so that's what I'm thinking about, is how do I actually get salaries funded to keep the lights on and keep the awesome people in my spheres employed and gainfully employed doing really awesome work, right? But that's going to change at different times, right? So what is it you need to free up your capacity to work on the next thing and fill that in? So probably research assistants, right? Other people you can offload tasks to meaningfully to enable you to build capacity, right? But ask some others, because look at the budget, see what they cost in there. Yeah, go Kat, please.
Something that I found out after becoming a postdoc is there are people at the university where you are who are employed to help you find out those things, like the research services office, I think it's called at QT. You probably can email them and ask for help. They might come back with some useful advice. They may not, but that might be one way of finding out how much something costs and how much the university will take off your grant, right? Because universities do that. You may not be familiar with the concept, but the money that you get, you don't get all of it. Maybe something to clarify
on costs,
as well.
right? So depending on the scheme, the university will take a cut, right? And so AR schemes are one beast, but we didn't really talk about industry funding or other funding sources. Every single one has its peculiarities. My advice to all of you: don't reinvent the wheel. Find someone who's applied for money under a scheme and ask them, right? And even sit down with someone else, that is in your zone, is in the same field, and ask them about their funding, their grant records, right? They'll probably want to talk to you about it, right? Because it's something that, often when you get to this point of career, you want to share the stories so others don't make the same mistakes you made, right? So my big lesson for today, the mistake I've made, is Daniel's son there, right? Trying to invent myself as a communications expert, a journalism studies expert, and a computational expert all simultaneously at once, right? And don't be that person, right? Be clear on who you are, what your narrative is, truly what your contribution is, and be comfortable in that skin, right? And then find others who can complement that and have a legibility in the other fields that you're working in.
I missed the beginning, so maybe you said something about it. But my question is, you just mentioned the kind of the other grants, all the linkage and industry kind of shared affiliate grants. If you have a word of advice, how do you find an industry partner? Where do you look for them? And how do you even approach them?
Yeah. This is a bit of the dark arts, Oleg. It's a really good question. You find them through the dark arts of networking, really. It's about being yourself invited to events and actually bucking up the courage that when you go to an event, I mean, for you in ADMS and a few others here as well, or others, there is lots of events, and I'm sure at your home universities, there are many of these things that you might be able to get along to. Have the courage to go and talk to someone else, right? Go to talks that have people from industry on them. Approach them, right? Build up relationships in your personal networks as well. Keep an ear to the ground, right? I have done work with people that I've met in a non-university capacity, right? Out at other events, just, out in the community, because they were saying something. I said, hey, hang on. We're doing stuff in that area. Let's have a conversation, right? And so that's the thing, is that absolutely is down to the network. And it is very much that all the successful industry funding that I've had and I've seen other people get, it's very much that question of finding people that you want to work with, right? Because there's industry funding you can get where it's convenient and it's good work to do, but it's not necessarily the real work that keeps you like, you know, like really excited. And there's the stuff where it's like, no, this is genuinely awesome. I love working on this. And there is such an awesome synergy. So the linkage that we're finishing up right now with the Foundation for Alcohol Research Education, that's one of those examples. So Amy Brownbill, who's amazing and our FAIR partner, like we had this event at the end of the project kind of going through all the work we did. And it was truly amazing because it's like, I feel like it's been a joy to work on this stuff because I've been in my happy place gathering alcohol ads, doing data analysis of them, building, you know, cool visualizations and doing that. And Amy kind of, when she comes in, she's like, Dan, this is like beyond anything we thought was possible. It's amazing. And I just get my tires inflated because I feel like I've done something, I've enabled them to do something or see the data in a particular way that they wouldn't have done prior to that. So finding those industry partners where it is a genuine delight to work with because I feel like they've been able to translate the work into policy outcomes that I couldn't do, even as much, you know, in that kind of media and policy space that I do work, they've done it so much better while I've been able to work in data and do kind of cool stuff on that side. And so those kinds of things are amazing when you can find them. But that was largely through a relationship that Nick had with FAIR that project came about. So I kind of was in the hot seat thanks to another relationship of someone else with an industry partner. But yeah, with other ones, it's just been, being at the right events, talking with the right people, but start small. The other thing I'd say with industry partners though, is don't shoot for the CEO. Like don't think that you go to the top. Like you've got to build a relationship at your same level. So find the people at the similar level, build the relationship over time. And it may be in like 7 years or 8 years that you get a call and it's like, hey, like I've been asked like to find a partner, academic partner for this, or like, I think there's something here. And so it's like those relationships pay off in the long run. So it's been like me with some ABC colleagues, like, you know, I've known them as they were just like, you know, bottom of the rung journos. Now they're like editors and others, and we're able to get stuff, you know, off the ground at that level. So it like play the long game as well. We're getting close to time, aren't we, Kat?
Yeah, just one last question if we have it. If not, we are very much happy to wrap up. Yeah.
Hopefully it's been useful. I don't have all the answers, please. I should have made that clear at the top. It's like I'm also working this out as I go. We are all working this out as we go. Please treat everything I've said here is just one person's advice. Read deeply. There's lots of really good work out there. And it's very kind of particular to disciplinary backgrounds as well. I'm coming at this obviously from someone who's transitioned across, you know, computer science and comms for most of my career. But hopefully some of it's been useful. Hopefully there's maybe one or two things there that you've picked up that otherwise might not have considered or thought about. But ultimately at the end of this, it's like, we're doing this, and I think that the grant stuff, it's a necessary part of it. As I said, learn to love it. By the end of it, I find it exciting to come around a grant idea. Like, and writing the one I've done this year, this LEAF grant, which we're trying to get up to do this big thing called OzPol, which would be like a big infrastructure to get all the Australian political communication data under one hood, build a dashboard, web hooks, a really, you know, an amazing array of cool stuff. We get to employ a bunch of software developers and data scientists and others to work on it. So watch this space if we get funded. That kind of stuff, genuinely exciting. Right. And writing it was a delight. Working, you know, being able to write emails to some colleagues, hey, let's have a go. You know, let's try it. Let's go for it. And whether we get it or not, we've kind of all been on that journey together. And so when we see each other at the conference, you can kind of go, yeah, you remember that harebrained idea? Never got funded, but man, you know, they missed an opportunity. And so this thing is also about field building, right? It's about relationship building as much as anything, because we're all in this broken ship together, right? And so part of it is about that solidarity. So yeah, learn to love it as much as you can. There's no such thing as wasted ideas. They will find their way, some way out there. But yeah, hopefully some of this has been useful. And enjoy your weekends, everyone.
All right, let's give a big round of applause to Dan. He has been really instrumental to SICSS Melbourne and making it happen. So please, big thanks to Dan.